You know, we work out, we exercise so that our bodies will be strong. We even try to develop our character so that our character is strong. And part of that is being spiritually strong. And the Holy Spirit comes to really give us that extra strength that we need. So it's a wonderful, wonderful thing that you're doing in preparing for the sacrament of confirmation. And to know the Holy Spirit is going to be with you for the rest of your life. The Holy Spirit will always be with you. And what a tremendous gift that is. Well, you put together some interesting topics tonight. So we're going to address some of these topics, and I'll talk about them at the end of my little presentation, which is not going to be that long on any of these topics. If you have particular questions on those, and then I think I'm supposed to get some sort of sign of when I need to move on to the next one. But I got to give you a break at the same time, okay? Now, we need to start with something being understood. And that is, I am not going to be politically correct tonight. I am not going to be politically correct. Because I really don't believe that political correctness is always good, or honest, or truthful. And so therefore, there may be some things that kind of go against the political correctness because they go according to what God has taught us. And you know, the culture that we live in is not one that embraces a lot of what God taught us and continues to challenge us with. And he's convinced that it's going to make us happy. Not just for the moment, but eternally. Okay? So, again, don't expect political correctness, but I will speak what the Word of God is. And that's my challenge tonight. And that's my promise to you. Okay? The first thing is an important issue. And that has to do with same-sex attraction, or with homosexuality, and the situation with regard to that. I think it is very, very important for us, number one, to realize we don't know why some people are homosexual in their orientation. Most likely it is not because of our genes. And you know what genes are, don't you? It's not our hands. Okay? Genes are kind of the biological makeup. So really, it is, what the evidence is showing is that's probably not the reason. But it really has much more to do with how we have grown, how we developed, early experiences that we've had, and the orientation that we have sexually is not something that we necessarily freely choose. A lot of times it's just part of our conditioning. It's part of the experience that we've had. There may be some genetic disposition toward it, but it's probably more about the environment from the time that we were just born. Very, very small. And it may even go previous to that time, while we're still in our mother's womb, is when we had that impact upon us. But we really don't know why people are homosexual. But what we do know is that they're all people, and that they're all sons and daughters of God. And therefore, we never hate, we never reject, we never put down, we never disrespect a person who is homosexual. They deserve our respect, our understanding, our treating them properly, and to recognize our dignity and the dignity that each and every one of us has, whether we are homosexual or heterosexual, we still have that human dignity. And that's the teaching of Jesus. And therefore, we never put down that human dignity. But rather, we respect it. And we love everyone. That's the command that Jesus gives us, is that we love everyone as he loves us. Because we all have our faults. We all have things that are not really totally right. But Jesus still loves us, even in the midst of the challenges that we may have. And I think homosexuality is a challenge for those who experience that same-sex attraction. because they're still called to live a life of chastity. Jesus invites us to a life of purity, that sex outside of a marriage between a man and a woman is not morally right. Premarital sex between a couple who are dating, a man and a woman who are dating, that's not morally right. The Bible is very clear about that. And any sexual activity outside of that marriage according to God's plan with a man and a woman is really not right. And so therefore, we can say that activity, sexual activity, outside of a marriage between a husband and a wife, a man and a woman, is not morally correct. So that applies to a lot of people. And people with same-sex attraction are called to that same chastity as anyone else who is not married. Now we know that in our culture, we have same-sex marriage. And that's something that was decided by the Supreme Court. And if I can quote the Chief Justice, Justice Roberts, he said that decision by the Supreme Court, it was a 5-4 decision, and what he said was, it had nothing to do with the Constitution. It was just a decision that those 5 judges made that they felt that was going to be a good societal position to recognize civilly same-sex marriage. But that's what it is. It's civil. It has nothing to do with the sacrament of marriage, because the state doesn't have that authority and that power. And so that's one of the challenges that is there. But just because the state says that that's according to the definition of what marriage is, and they have a very much different definition than we do. Because for us, marriage is not just a contract, as it is in the civil law, but rather it's a covenant. And it's a covenant between a man and a woman and God. And so it's a more serious commitment that is there. And not only is it a covenant with God, it's also a sacrament of God's love is expressed through the love of a man and a woman, a husband and a wife, within their marriage relationship. It has a sacred quality to it. And that is according to God's plan. Because God wanted to invite human beings into procreation. And the purpose of marriage is mutual love between a man and a woman, and also procreation. One of the main reasons for the family is that, even sociologically, is to provide for children, to welcome children into that relationship. And that can only happen naturally through the love of a husband and a wife. And so how important it is for us to realize, civilly, we accept the civil law. But that really is not God's plan for marriage. God's plan for marriage is something that has a great deal of sacredness. It is really something that invites a husband and a wife into that spiritual union that really transcends just the human. And so that's the reason why, even in the Supreme Court decision, they said we don't expect churches to recognize same-sex marriages. They didn't make that saying it's a requirement or anything like that, because they know that that was beyond their power. All they could do was define it civilly. And so, with regard to same-sex attraction, we love each and every human being, homosexual, heterosexual, we love each and every one. We're never called to disrespect or to make fun of or to call names or to put anybody down. That would be wrong, that is sinful. But at the same time, we don't have to say that that which God really says is morally wrong is morally right. And that has to do with another part of your question that you had about judging other people. And Jesus told us not to judge other people. He said, judge not, and you will not be judged. You know, Jesus talked about that very, very clearly. So we're not called to judge other people. But that doesn't mean we cannot make a judgment about right or wrong, morally good or bad actions. And we can make a judgment about those. And we can say that certain actions, lying, cheating, stealing, etc., those things are sinful. We can never convict a person of sin because only God can do that. And that's judgment. But what we can do is say this is sinful because this action, this attitude is against God's revelation of God's plan for our happiness here and our happiness eternally. So we have to be able to judge that there are certain things that are right or wrong. Otherwise, we'd have to say it was fine that Hitler killed 6 million Jews and Christians and homosexuals in the Holocaust. Well, that was fine because that's what he decided to do. No, that was sinfully wrong. That was a sinful action. But we are not Hitler's judge, though. But we definitely can say what he did was sinful. Or the fact that Stalin killed 22 million people in the Ukraine, starved them to death, basically. But that was sinful. That was morally wrong. And we have to be able to say certain things are morally right, certain things are morally wrong. If they're morally right, they're virtue. If they're morally wrong, they're sinful. But we don't judge the individual. I'm going to stop for a minute. Any questions or comments about any of that? Don't answer. Making sense so far? What I'm trying to say? Okay. Now, another area that came in here has to do with transgender. And obviously that is a very hot topic in our culture today. The whole question of transgender. First of all, sometimes transgender is because of a chromosomal defect or change, that it didn't turn out as normal chromosomes would. Sometimes transgender comes from that, but that is relatively rare. More transgender comes from, again, the nurture that people get, how they're raised, the attitude that they have, their own self-image. That really is where transgender comes in more, where people feel confused, that maybe physically they are one sex, but they feel more identified with the other. But you really can't change your sex because it's in every cell of your body. It's all there. So you can't change your sex. Now they do what they call sex change operations, but those really do not change the sex. The person is still genetically and chromosomally what they were before. I really feel sorry for people who struggle with their gender identity, because it can be a great struggle. And once again, we're not called to judge or to condemn. That's not where we're at. And it's not to make fun of or to call names or to do anything like that. But rather, those people are doing some struggling. And most likely that struggle is because of something that, again, that was inherent, given to them very, very young, and in some way within the dynamics of their own life. One thing I will mention to you is that trying to change gender physically usually does not lead to happiness. There's a much higher suicide rate among those who have had a so-called sex change operation than those who have not. And so there can be some struggles. But that's not necessarily the answer to the situation. But again, compassion, understanding. Again, there can be all kinds of psychological, mental struggles that we can have within our life. And so we don't condemn or look down on people because of those, but rather we pray for them. And we show that we love them in the midst of the struggles and the challenges that they may have. Okay? So transgender, again, it's something that's important. It's something that our culture talks a lot about, but I don't think they talk about it very honestly. I don't think you get very honest information from the television or maybe even from some of your classes. And so I challenge you just to think about searching for better information, searching for a better understanding, and not just what the pop culture is saying out there. Because so often it's politically correct, but it really is not humanly accurate or promoting really even human dignity. And that's part of the challenge that we have. So transsexual is, again, love the person. We love them. And we need to support them in the challenges that they may have within their own life. And to know that with love, they can be more supportive. They will feel better about themselves, about that they're worthwhile, that they are very valuable people, as each and every one of us wants to be. Okay? Now, another issue, and I know it's up here, it's vaping. I understand that vaping is getting to be quite a popular thing. So I've gone out and I've done a little bit of study about vaping. Now, I need to tell you beforehand, I have smoked 4 cigarettes in my whole life. That's it. Just 4 cigarettes in my whole life. And I decided when I was very young, that was stupid. Okay, so that was the decision I made. I came from a family, by the way, in which there were 6 kids and then my 2 parents. And out of those 8 people, I was the only one who didn't smoke. I was the only one. And I was always so glad, because you know when I got diagnosed with cancer, you know what the first question the doctor asked me? Have you ever smoked? Because they know that smoking is so bad for your health. Okay? So smoking is really bad for our health. And it doesn't mean that everybody who smokes is going to get cancer, because they're not. But it does make you more conducive. And so I was glad to be able to say, no, I have never smoked. So they said, okay, that's good, and we'll go on to the next things. And so anyway, vaping. Vaping was developed to help people who smoke get off the habit. That was the purpose for the development of vaping. It was taking people who were so addicted to smoking that they couldn't break it on their own. And some people are, when they're addicted to something, that they can be so tied up in that it really is very, very difficult for them to break it. So some doctors developed vaping in order to give those people the opportunity to get away from the nicotine, and particularly the tar that's involved in smoking cigarettes, to get away from that, and so that they could do something. And so they can breathe something in and see what looks like smoke coming out. But that is how it got started. So now, why would people start to use vaping if they don't need to break the addiction to smoking? That's the question that has to be asked. And one of the reasons why a lot of adults are concerned about vaping is because it can be, not necessarily always, but it can definitely be an entree into smoking. So for those who are not trying to break the habit of smoking by vaping, vaping can actually be a way of becoming more engaged in smoking. And that's part of the big fear with regard to vaping. And so that's the reason why it's very important. Again, why take the medicine if you don't have the disease? Okay? Vaping is a medicine, basically. If you don't have the disease, don't take that. Because even by taking the medicine, sometimes you can make yourself sick. Okay? So that's the thing with regard to vaping. With regard to weed or pot, you know, can be some very good uses. They are finding ways in which the ingredients within marijuana can be helpful, particularly in the relief of pain. Okay? So the medicinal use of marijuana can be very, very helpful, again, for people who are sick. People who are sick. That's the use for it. And that's what most of the states that have approved marijuana is for medical, or what they call medicinal use. And so it's important to realize, again, that that's being used as a medicine. But we also know marijuana can be used recreationally. And it can be harmful to the body. It can be somewhat dangerous, because people who are on a high like that sometimes do reckless things, do hurtful things. And once again, and I've been told by more than one person that their smoking pot was the first step for them to get into much harder drugs, to get into the opioids, to get into the drugs that really can kill you. Okay? But it was through marijuana was their first step into that. Now, does that mean that everybody who smokes marijuana is going to end up with a heart attack? No. But to know that that can be an entree, that can be an entry into that that's a danger that people have, that once they begin to get hooked on one thing, it can lead to something else. Because, you know why? We always desire a better high. We always desire something that's more pleasurable. That's one of the reasons why it can be an entree into something much more serious. Okay? So that's the basic thing. Should we use something that is very possibly going to harm our body, but not using it as a medicine? Okay? But rather just for enjoyment, just for fun, when there's a real danger involved? That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Doesn't make a lot of sense of why people would do that. I understand it, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And so that's important for us to realize the dignity that we have. And that's the other part of this. You know, we have a God-given dignity. We have a God-given dignity. And we have to be proud of our dignity. And we have to live our life in a way that promotes our dignity, that respects who we are. And we're not just animals. We're human beings with an intelligence, with free will, with an ability to do right and to wrong, to do harm or to love. And that's our dignity. And not only that, we're also daughters and sons of God, that we share in God's own life. That's our dignity as children of God. And so the choices we make need to be ones that will respect our dignity, that don't compromise that don't denigrate who we are as human beings and as children of God who are destined for eternal life. That's so very important for us to realize our dignity. And is this really worthy of me? That was one of the things that I was taught as a kid. That was one of the things my parents shared with me. Was, Tom, you are special. You are a special person because God created you. And you're a member of this family. And I know, my parents said to me, don't do anything that's going to disgrace our family name. That was very important. I hope your parents are saying the same thing to you. That you don't do anything that disgraces your family name. Because your family name is very, very important. It's a value, not only for your parents, but also for you. And so you want to make good choices. But it's primarily about respecting our bodies, respecting our persons. And that has to do then when we also get into things like suicide, which is another topic that was brought up here. Suicide What's the fifth commandment, by the way? Thou shalt not kill, okay? Thou shalt not kill. So that means not killing others and not killing ourselves. Not killing ourselves. Suicide is seriously morally wrong. It is not morally right. One of the things, and I've had several funerals for individuals who have committed suicide, so I'm not a stranger to this. Okay? But what I have found is that most of them were either on maybe prescribed drugs that really messed up their thinking, or were on unprescribed illicit drugs that messed up their thinking, or they were in such a state of depression that they really weren't able to think correctly. And so very often when people commit suicide, it's because of the fact that they are so ill at that particular time, that they are emotionally ill, they may be addicted, problems are there, depression and everything, and that is the problem. But it still is wrong. Now, in our country today, there's some states, I think it's 8 of them right now, who have what's called assisted suicide. And assisted suicide means that a person who is terminally ill can sign a document that they are of sound mind, that they are not depressed, that they are not being forced into doing this, but that they want the doctor to assist them in killing themselves. That's what assisted suicide is. Now, one of the things when they tried to sell the idea of assisted suicide, what they said was, well, these people are in pain, these people are suffering in pain, and therefore that's the reason why we need assisted suicide. If a dog was ever treated, so therefore we should kill these people humanely because they're in pain. But when they did a survey of people who have asked for assisted suicide, you know what the reason was? Why they wanted suicide? It wasn't because of pain. It wasn't because they were ill. It was they didn't want to be a burden. They didn't want to be a burden to their family, to their children. They didn't want to be a burden for others to take care of. Isn't that sad? Isn't that sad that somebody who is in the twilight of their lives feels that they would just be a burden? And so let's end it more quickly. Rather than allowing compassionate love to be there and care for them, that's really sad. That's a sad commentary on our feel that they would just be a burden, and as a burden, that would be a terrible thing. One of the things that I did years ago was I was a chaplain trainee at a mental institution for convicted felons. And the purpose of this institution was to analyze these convicted felons psychologically to see, what was going to be the best way to help them. Was it to go to prison, be on probation, receive special help, or whatever? But anyway, one night I was having this discussion, because they didn't have anything to do in the evening, so I decided I'd have a discussion. So we were just going through the commandments one evening, and we got to the 5th commandment, and something came up about suicide. And I said, anybody who tries suicide, I think is crazy. They're mentally ill. And I looked around the table. 12 convicted felons. 3 of them I knew had attempted suicide. There wasn't a guard standing outside the door either. And I thought, oh my gosh, I just told those 3 that they were crazy at that time. And then we began to talk a little bit, and 3 more admitted that they had attempted suicide, mainly by running into pillars on the turnpike You know, into bridges, and there's the big pillars there, that's one way, unfortunately. Not a very pleasant way to do it. But they all tried that. Not all of them tried it that way, others tried other ways. But what they all said to a person was, yes, I was crazy at the time. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't in control of myself. And so to realize that and to know that sometimes it's because of great illness, because of great depression, or other things that people make terrible, terrible decisions, terrible choices. If ever you hear from one of your friends that they're thinking about suicide or talking about it, talk to them. Tell them how important they are. Tell them that you care for them. And make sure you get them to go to an adult who can help them, a counselor, a teacher, to their parents. And if they won't go, then you need to go out of love for them, to go to make sure that they get the help that they might need. Because there's points in our life when we all need some help. And it's sad if people won't try to bring that help that could be there. Do we need a stand-up break? Yes. Why don't you go ahead and stand up? That's good. There was a question came up about what happens to a person if they do commit suicide. Okay, in order for first of all, suicide is a mortal sin. It is mortally sinful. Therefore, a person who deliberately, freely commits suicide, we believe, jeopardizes their soul for all eternity. They may go to hell. Okay? That's for God to judge. But killing another person or killing ourselves is a mortal sin. It is mortally sinful. And so therefore, it jeopardizes eternal salvation. Okay? So a person may go to hell if they fully know that and freely choose to do that. So it's very, very serious moral issue. The same with regard to abortion. And that's another topic that you have down here. Is abortion. Because abortion is killing a human being. It's killing a human being. And again, very often in our culture, they don't give you the full facts of what is involved in an abortion, that this truly is a separate human life. It's a separate human being that is there within the womb of the mother, just as you and I were separate human beings when we were in our mother's womb. We were not just an appendage to our mother, but rather we had our own unique identity, our own unique DNA, our own unique genetic difference. And so scientifically, a child within the womb is a unique human being, and therefore deserves the respect that every human being, that those God-given rights are life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, according to our Declaration of Independence. And so the right to life, and the right to life is not something that comes from the government. It comes from God. It's not something that comes from the parents. It comes from God. And so that right to life is so very, very important and so very basic, the right to life itself. But again, they end up using some nice little slogans. My body, my rights. You ever heard that one? Anybody ever heard that? My body, my rights? Well, first of all, is it really my body? No, it's not. My body's on loan to me. Okay? My body comes from God. God is the one who created me through the love of my parents. So therefore, it's really not my body, but rather I'm able to use this body. And then secondly, when a woman is pregnant, there's not just one body, there's two bodies. And the two bodies both have rights. And so therefore, it's very important to realize that that baby has a right to life. And if you're going to say my body, that baby is saying my body. Okay? The other thing with regard to abortion, abortion is a very, very painful process. It's a very painful process, particularly as the child gets a little more older, mature. But you know there's a heartbeat after 21 days? Ooh. Most women don't even know they're pregnant yet. But there's already a heartbeat. Okay? And so there is life there from very, very, very early. And there's also a nervous system that is there. And therefore, pain is inflicted upon those unborn children through abortion. As they, and I'm not going to describe abortion, ask your parents what they do to perform an abortion. It's a horrendous thing. It's absolutely horrendous. But again, our culture just kind of glosses over that. You know, since Roe v. Wade was put in back in 1973, way before any of you were born, since then over 60 million unborn babies have had their life terminated in their mother's womb. That's an horrendous thing. You know, we get upset about Hitler and his 5 million Jews. Absolutely terrible, absolutely horrendous, no question about it. But we've got 60 million, and so many people in our culture say, oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And by the way, the people who started abortion and the availability of abortion was Margaret Sanger. She was one of the big proponents, and she's what we call a eugenicist. A eugenicist is one who wants to make a better race. And so you make a better race by doing away with the inferior people, the ones who don't quite match up to being superior. That's a eugenicist. And that's really where Planned Parenthood came from. She was the foundress of Planned Parenthood. So the purpose was to do away with the misfits, do away with the lower class, to do away with them so that there could be a better human race. Isn't that scary? That's scary. Very scary. So abortion, again, is very much accepted in our culture and our society. But to know that it is killing a human person, it's killing a human being in a terrible way. And I would say this, and I hope nobody's offended by this, but we would not do to a dog what they do to an unborn baby. We would not do it to a dog, or to a cat, or to a rat. We would not do those things, but we'll do it to an unborn baby. That's an horrendous sin. Abortion is a sin. It's absolutely a mortal sin. Okay, so it is totally sinful to kill that unborn child. So that's, again, important issue. And again, we have to be countercultural. If we're going to be true to God and His commandments, then we're not going to accept some of this culture stuff that says, oh, that's okay, that's nothing, no big deal. No, it's a huge deal. So, any questions with regard to that? Yeah. Okay, is abortion okay if the mother's life is in jeopardy? You know, I went and I've talked to some OB/GYN doctors who deliver babies, because I wanted to get that information on that. And they said in this day and age, first of all, if a woman has good prenatal care, there's not going to be that danger. And if they would be in the situation where they'd have to make a decision, they know which one they can save and which one they could not save. So it's not a question of, oh, we're going to kill the mother to save the baby, or kill the baby to save the mother. They would go first to try to save both. But there may be something goes so badly awry. And they would say this is very, very rare in this day and age with all of our medical advances and everything, where there would be, that they would get themselves in that situation. So that it's probably, it's one of those arguments that speaks to the heartstrings. You know, the other is rape. If a woman is raped and she becomes pregnant, well, first of all, if this woman is raped, she should immediately go to a medical facility, because there's ways in which they can treat that very, very morally, legitimately, and to take care of that situation. And so that's what should happen if someone is raped. But if a child is conceived through rape, and by the way, less than 2% of the abortions in the United States were because of rape, or even claimed to be because of rape. Less than 2%. So, you know, it's not a huge number. But still, did that baby do something wrong? That the baby had to die? You know, and those are difficult things. But we never make a regret for when we've taken care of life. We may very often regret. You know, I've had parents who come to me and they said, you know, we were told by our doctor that our baby is deformed, and we were encouraged to terminate the pregnancy, to kill the baby, to have an abortion. And I said, well, what did you do? And they said, we just asked the doctor, is that baby alive right now? And the doctor said, yes, but maybe the baby is going to die before it's born, or maybe during the birth process, or certainly a few hours or days or months after the baby is born, the baby's going to die because it has some serious defects. But the parents said, okay, if the baby is alive now, we'll love that baby as long as the baby is alive. We hope that that's for a long time. But as long as that baby is alive, we will love him. And that's an important thing to realize. People can love in that way. They'll never regret having loved. And the fact is, sometimes people, when they've been encouraged to have an abortion because of a child with a defect, that child has had a wonderful life and has been able to enjoy life, because doctors are not God. Doctors are not God. Nobody knows absolutely about what things are there and what life is there. So anyway, it's just a very important thing. So don't get fooled by some of these arguments that come up, because they're only half-truths. And a lot of times they're not well substantiated. And it absolutely very often denies very basic biology, very basic science, that that child from the first moment of conception has a unique DNA, a unique identity. Okay, anything else on that? Yeah. My view on birth control and whether it is better or worse than abortion. It certainly is not worse than abortion. Abortion is absolutely the worst thing, because it is killing a living human being. Okay? Now, birth control, and there's many ways of birth control. You know, what is God's plan for human sexuality? God's plan for human sexuality is about procreation. It's about the gift of life. It's about, that's what our sexuality is about. That's the reason why we are male and female, and why couples are joined together within marriage, is in order to bring forth new life. That's what it says in Genesis. You know, increase and multiply. So therefore, the presumption and the real purpose of sexuality is not fun, it's not recreation, and it's not even just expressing love. It's about the power of creation. It's sharing in the very creative power of God himself. That is the dignity of human sexuality. That God is possibly raising this couple up to become co-creators with him of a new human life that will go on for all eternity. That's awesome type of stuff when you stop and think about it. So, sometimes though, people may say, it's not responsible for us to bring a child into the world at this time because of serious reasons, not selfish reasons, but serious reasons. And in that case, they may say, maybe we need to use natural family planning, taking advantage of the normal cycles that women have with regard to when they are possible that they're going to get pregnant or why not. And so that sort of birth control can be morally correct and right. But other forms of birth control really contradict the nature of the sexuality itself. There's some intrinsic contradictions there, and that's the reason why that's morally wrong. Because it's really negating what sexuality is supposed to be about. Does that help at all? Okay. Any other questions? What? For health purposes? Got the question? Okay. Sometimes women need to take a medication that may make them infertile, but it's to correct an ailment, and that's perfectly morally legitimate. Because the purpose of it is not to negate sex and the sexual act and conception, but the purpose is to treat an illness. And so that is fine. Yes?
Is adoption a suitable replacement for abortion?
Well, yeah. If people are not in a situation where they can care for their child, then adoption is certainly a possibility. And there's many, many people who would love to adopt children. Many couples have problems getting pregnant, but they are willing to welcome a child into their home and to raise that child, to care for that child. Sometimes single mothers are very reluctant to accept a child, although that is becoming more common as well. But a lot of them realize that children need both a father and a mother, that both of those are very important, both parents. And so that they are willing to give up their child so that they can have both a father and a mother and to nurture that child. And that's very important for a child's psychological welfare, is in some way having both the male and the female mother and father. But adoption is certainly a good option. Are some children an adoption? Sometimes they are, but they do more examination about parents before they allow them to adopt than they do for parents who have children naturally. And so sometimes, the adoption parents are better vetted than the others. I'll tell you where we run into some problem though. Sometimes foster care is a situation where that really needs to be monitored more by the state to make sure that foster care is good. But usually in cases of adoption, those parents have been vetted pretty well before they're allowed to legally adopt. But good questions. Any other? Yeah. You did what? If they want to avoid abortion, no. test tube babies are conceived outside. So, I mean, they definitely, you wouldn't go do a test tube conception if you, in order to abort it. Those would be two totally different things. And you wouldn't go pay $10,000 to get pregnant in order to have an abortion. So it's really, they're two different things, totally. And the one probably would not be done. I mean, it would not. And again, test tube babies, you know, we really believe that children should be conceived in a natural human act of love between a husband and a wife, rather than just scientifically doing what they call in vitro or test tube babies, in vitro fertilization. You ever read the book, and when you get older you may read it, called 1984. It was a scary book, and it's scary about how much of that has come about. It was written in the 60s, but it was a prediction about how people would be trying to control life rather than to accept the gift of life. And a lot of things like that came up. Other questions? You're in good shape? How are we doing time-wise, folks?
We could probably take one more question.
Okay, a couple more. The gene alterations, the genetic engineering is very, very scary. It holds promise for maybe correcting maladies, illnesses, and things like that. It holds promise for that. But the fact is, people will use it for other reasons. I want a black-haired child. I don't want my child to be a blonde. Let's do genetic engineering. You know, one of the reasons for abortion these days is I wanted a boy, I didn't want a girl. So anything can be used for a negative reason. And that's the problem with genetic engineering, and why it really needs to be some very strong ethical standards. In China, even the Chinese, who are atheists, said, no, this is wrong. And they really got after the scientists who had done that genetic engineering on those embryos. Other question? Yeah. Aren't there so many kids? No. There are parents who are looking for children, or couples looking for children. So no, we haven't exhausted the pool of possible adoptions. No. Yep. Well, there's a whole, as far as people who place children through for adoption, they really do a lot of surveying, they do a lot of study, they really try to, and if people don't come up to the standards, they will not allow them to adopt. They won't get on the list. And usually, the woman, the mother, has the option of who is chosen, who she chooses to allow her child to be adopted by her. Yes? Why do they want a perfect child? Vanity. Vanity. Pride. I want this perfect child. Or I want my child to be a super athlete. My child needs to be a super athlete. That's the reason why they want a perfect child. And you know, we look at it and say, it's kind of stupid, but That's where people are at sometimes. Yes. Should women be allowed to be priests? It's a good question, and it is one in here. We do not allow women to be priests because there's a different role between men and women. In families, there's a different role between men and women. A man cannot be a mother. A mother really cannot be the father. There's different roles within our sexuality. And those roles can also be within the family of the church. There can be a reason, and a good reason, that there's a difference between men and women in priesthood and religious life. Women can become nuns. Women can certainly dedicate their life to God and serve in so many beautiful ways, in so many ways of service. Jesus didn't ordain women. Jesus did crack a lot of the barriers to women in his own day. Women were not that respected in the time of Jesus. But Jesus definitely lifted them up. Jesus definitely broke some of the taboos. Jesus also, who's the greatest saint of all? Mary is. A woman is the greatest saint that we know. So it's not a question of being inferior at all. It's just different. And since Jesus did not ordain women, we feel that carries on. Another reason is that there's that reciprocity between the bride and the groom in the scriptures. And the church is seen as the bride. The groom, Jesus, is the groom. And there is sexual identity male within being a groom and the female, the bride. And so the priest acts in the person of Christ as the groom. And so that's one of the reasons as well. So do I expect that women will be ordained priests? No, I don't. Because of our theology and because of primarily because of what Jesus did himself. Elevated the place of women. Mary is the greatest of all the saints, but he didn't ordain them as priests. They are looking at the possibility of women deacons. So that is one thing that is being looked at. But we have no history whatsoever of women priests. Okay. Other questions that I haven't covered? Yes. Yeah, they're trying to do some study on that because they know in the early church that there were women who were called deaconesses. But what the role of the women deaconesses was is what they're trying to figure out. And it probably was not the same as the ordained deacon that we would have today, like Deacon Stanley, okay? So he's a permanent deacon. So, but probably their role was different, so that's what they're trying to study. Okay. Oh, right. I'm sorry. If the goal of a marriage is to help get your spouse to heaven, what if same-sex marriage has that same goal, okay? You know, I think we help each other to get to heaven in a lot of different ways. And I think certainly married couples, men and women within marriage, that is one of the ways in which they help each other to get to heaven. But there's many other ways in which people can help each other to get to heaven. And So I don't think even though same-sex marriage would say that's their goal, that's their purpose, I would say that really is not necessary in order for you to get to heaven. Okay? But other ways are there, other people. I mean, I have people helping me get to heaven, and I certainly am not married, okay, except committed to the church as a celibate. But there's people helping me to get to heaven. And so it doesn't take same-sex marriage for that to happen. Okay, really, you have had wonderful questions, really great, and